Welcome back. It is episode 150. I am your host, Jacob Harris, and this podcast is brought to you by Achievement Apex and Power Pit Rockingham. Shout out to Ped Test Australia as well as Bulk Gym Chalk. Today I am joined by Stuart Locke. Thank you for being here, mate.
100%. Love to be here, baby.
Man, I appreciate your time. It's crazy. You are in, I might have this wrong and then it will be totally embarrassing. I was under the impression you are currently in Canada. Is that correct?
Fuck no. No, not a chance. No. We live in Jacksonville Beach, Florida.
Okay, the time zone threw me off. How big of a difference is there between Florida and Canada?
It's in the same time zone, Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah, okay.
So it's like 3,000 kilometers just straight north. Like it's the same time zone, just 3,000 kilometers north.
Yeah, my geography is horrible. So to me, in my head, when I thought that, because I've spoken to a few people in Canada, and straight away I went, oh, there's a big time difference here. It must be, but now it makes a lot more sense. You had put a post out just recently, actually tonight, and then you'd spoken about it again recently. You moved back to Florida. Is it a couple of years ago or even maybe like 2 years ago?
Yeah, so I grew up in the United States and then I left to go to Canada in 2006. Like I'm Canadian by birth. Then I lived there from 2006 till 2022, and I spent 10 years. I initially went to university at the University of Ottawa, and then I spent 10 years there. And then 2022, my wife and I just made the decision. I was like, this place sucks. We're paying 50% income tax, and we have no prospect of a reasonable or comfortable life here, and we hate the winter, so let's move. And we did.
Fair enough. I find this interesting because for whatever reason, and it could have something to do with it being dramatized in cinema growing up, I want to go to Canada. It seems cool, but every time someone asks me, oh yeah, why do you want to go to Canada? I don't actually have an answer, but for whatever reason, it's like, I think maybe as a kid, it's like maybe some people want to go to Hollywood. For some reason, mine's Canada. Is there a reason to go to Canada?
Yeah. So if you go to Alberta or British Columbia, so if you go to Victoria in British Columbia, which is on Vancouver Island, or if you go to Banff, which is in Alberta, or if you go to Montreal, which is in Quebec, those are all great places to visit. The rest of the country you can throw in the trash.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to think. What have we had out of Canada? Because we do this with Australia a lot. We've got a much smaller list than you guys. What's come out of Canada besides like Jim Carrey? That's good?
Electricity. We have a lot of hydroelectricity.
Nice.
We sell a ton of hydroelectricity to America. Trees. The majority of the boreal forest is in Canada. We have Mike Myers. We have Justin Bieber.
It's a bit strange to have them both in the same sentence but fair enough. Yeah.
I'm trying to think what else. Putin. I don't know if you know what Putin is.
Oh, I think we pronounce it poutine. Are you talking about like where it's like what we call them, like fries or chips, and it's got cheese on it?
Yeah, and gravy, and then the gravy melts the cheese.
I've never had it. I've heard it's incredible.
It's the fucking best, dude. That's one of the only things that I miss about Canada.
Is that how you squatted 600 pounds?
Dude, you think I only squatted 600 pounds? That's expensive.
I know you squatted more than 600 pounds. I recently saw you'd put up, or when I was like looking at some of the videos, you'd high bar squatted. I think it was just over 600 pounds for a set of 6 or something.
Yeah, it was I think the conversion is 280 kilos.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. That's a big part of it. That and shawarma. I don't know if you guys have shawarma in Australia.
No,
it's like Lebanese food, dude. Shawarma's like Lebanese food. So you ever see those big those big spits where they have like all the meat on it and it's rotating and cooking as it rotates?
Looks so unsanitary.
It is, and I don't know how you don't get food poisoning. But that's shawarma, and for whatever reason, the highest concentration of shawarma restaurants like in the world is in the city that I lived in after I left my hometown. And it's really fucking good. And you'll go and get a plate, and it'll be like 2,500 calories. And so when I was fucking bloat maxing, I'd have that like 6 days a week.
Wow, that sounds a lot more appealing than what I did. And I usually just made everything into a sandwich.
That's a really good idea. Honestly, sandwiches and wraps, like if you just take ground beef and rice and then put it in a wrap, and then you do 3 wraps every time, it ends up being like another 200 grams of carbs.
Well, I had a different. So what I'd put really unconventional things in sandwiches: lasagna, shepherd's pie, spaghetti bolognese. Yeah, I know, quite strange,
You
but
know what, though? Spaghetti bolognese, that sounds, honestly, yeah, that sounds pretty good. It's kind of like a meatball sandwich.
it's very good, and I can confirm I gained way too much weight doing it, so it obviously worked. I have a question
Hmm.
because this is a super intense thing to get into early on, and why not do it? Because
Hmm.
it's a big conversation. You are religious.
Yes.
I find this interesting
Okay.
because I don't know, not everyone's, I guess, a certain way as a
Hmm.
person when they're religious, but I think it's probably not strange to make the statement that people that are religious can commonly just be like really polite and kind of like just very like, Christian like that. Well, that's the experience we have here anyway.
Hmm.
I find it interesting when someone's religious, but they're very, maybe brass is the word I'm thinking of, like quite like,
Hmm.
I would say that you're a pretty straightforward dude, and like you would not strike me as someone that's religious. And I'm curious as to like how that is because I've always found myself intrigued by religion and faith, and
Hmm.
I actually admire faith because I think it would bring me a lot of peace as an individual. But
Hmm.
I've never been able to get my head around uh, Christianity because I guess in my head I'm like, that's stupid. I can't believe it. Why would I ever believe that? That's dumb. And I find that quite actually frustrating because I actually think it's admirable. So I'm curious as to where yours comes from.
I think when you look at the gospel, like the only time in the gospel where Jesus is actually um, angry is like when he throws the money lenders out of the temple, right? So like there is this component, um, of Christ's time here on earth where he did like fucking snap, and he so strongly and fundamentally disagreed that he just fucking lost his shit. And I think that there is this misconception, right? So in the Gospels, they say the meek shall inherit the earth. The translation from ancient Greek isn't necessarily meek, like that's the closest word we have in English. But the better translation for that from Koineo, which is ancient Greek, is um, those who have swords but keep them sheathed. So difference is essentially you are capable of and you can be, kind of assertive and aggressive, but you choose not to be because of, the teachings of Christ and what he brought to us through the gospel.
Interesting. So it's my understanding with this a lot of the time when I speak to people about it as well is that I think that religion is highly like not customizable is not the word that makes it sound like we're playing Need for Speed, but I think it seems to be very individualized. Like I remember speaking to like a family member of mine who had like their opinion on it, and she kind of responded with sort of, I have my own relationship with it. So because my immediate question was sort of like, oh, but like snakes can't fucking talk, that's stupid, and she was kind of like, but I don't resonate with that stuff. I have my own approach, and then that's when I kind of realized that not everyone just believes the exact same thing, and that's probably a
Mhm.
big part of it, right?
And everyone's individual, like everyone's theology is going to be slightly different, and everyone's interpretation of the Bible is going to be slightly different. And I think the struggle that a lot of people have with the Old and New Testament is like they don't necessarily understand it, but a lot of that is because they're not placing that in a historical context, right? Like they're looking at it in a vacuum. And uh, those two aren't separable because then they make no sense. And so, perfect example is in the Old Testament, right? They said Methuselah is like 900 and something years old. So you read that and you're like, that doesn't really make sense. Um, but in actuality, like they had a different, I can't remember the specifics of it, but they had a different means of tracking time and they had a different means of tracking age in the Old Testament compared to what we do now. So when you place it within that historical context, like his age ends up being, I think, after the conversion, like 84 or something, right? And so when we place it within that historical context, and we understand the cultural implications of that, a lot of these things like make a lot more sense. And then there's a lot of really crazy and really incredible things that happened in the Old Testament that we now have historical support for. So, for instance, um, God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. We have now found, I think, in the last 20 years, like we found the actual historical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the interesting thing was they found all of this pottery that when initially unearthed, they're like, oh, all of this pottery is like overly glazed, right? And then they took the actual whole pot and they realized it was only like glazed on one side, and they did some kind of scientific test that I don't know the specifics of, and they realized that it was exposed to very high temperatures for a very short period of time, and that's how it ended up with this glaze on one side because it was facing down. And so, um, in the Bible, when they say he rained down pillars of fire, like now there's this like weird.
This podcast is sponsored by Achievement Apex. Achievement Apex creates some of the best barbells in the world, and they supply some of these barbells to some of the strongest powerlifters and athletes in the world. If you want an Achievement Apex barbell, you can go to achievementapex.com and use the code PORTAPOTTY for 10% off any order that you make.
Historical evidence that maybe there was some very, very high temperature event in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah right around 4,000 years ago. You're like, okay, we don't know the specifics of it. And really, like, outside of the Bible, we don't have a ton of historical context for it. But there's a basis for a lot of these things. And I think the thing that people struggle with is they read this and then they don't have the intellectual curiosity to go off and be like, okay, well, what else is going on here? And a lot of this stuff in the Old Testament, like, you're like, oh, this is nuts. And then you actually look into it, and then you actually look at the historical context, and then you actually start to search for additional answers. And you're like, oh, a lot of this stuff is like independently verifiable outside of the Old Testament or outside of the New Testament.
That's interesting because I've spoken to a few people about it, and I guess, like I said, there's different levels. Some people are religious because their family was, and some people don't look that far into it or try to learn anything about this sort of thing. And I had an interesting conversation that came out at my doctor's, and he turned around to me and he said it in a very quite hilariously condescending kind of way, and he was like, "What do you think do you really think we like?" It was funny the way that he was. Christianity and some of the stories that go along with it, I would sometimes personally find them hard to believe and things like that, as I've mentioned. And he sort of turned to me, and it just made me feel like the only person in the world that didn't believe it all of a sudden. And he kind of went, "You really think everyone came from monkeys?" like I was like a total asshole, and I was like, I feel like now you're making me question the confidence in this guy's voice, as if like, oh, look at this guy over here. Like, he still believes that. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, and then we had a conversation, right? And I said, I think I said something like, sounds more believable than a talking snake. And then he kind of went into his kind of thing about it. And it was interesting, right? It's very similar to that conversation. So I was curious because he's, once again, a little bit less conservative, but I've met a lot of conservative people in my life, or maybe that kind of has a bit more of a political meaning. I guess I think more conventional people who are just very, I don't even know, withdrawn maybe, and just kind of like quiet, and that they have generally a different approach. So I just find it interesting, and I'm actually really curious about some of, I guess, the life struggles that you've had when it comes to injuries and things that have happened, because that's where that kind of works in for me. And I've had experiences where I feel like that would have really helped. And I think that's kind of like, it's not that I would want to lean on it like it's a crutch, but I think it must be nice to an extent, have faith that gives you a confidence that when you're going through something shitty, you're still going to be experiencing something shitty, but maybe you don't feel as alone. And that's probably very helpful, I imagine. And so you'd actually mentioned that before you'd had your most recent injury, you'd had quite a bad back injury. And I was kind of curious to hear a little bit more about how bad that was, because you'd talked about it like it was really bad.
Yeah. So I ended up with so when you have a bad enough lumbar spine injury, you end up with something called cauda equina. And now that I'm married to a doctor, I understand that that's a medical emergency, and you're typically supposed to have surgery. but I lost bladder control. So I would go to like sit down on the toilet and I'd start peeing before I was on the toilet. And so, like being the meathead that I was, because this was like a month out from a meet. So being the meathead that I was like, well, I'm just gonna take more D-ball because my buddy told me that that made his back feel better, and I'm just gonna bring extra underwear to work because when I bend over to grab a plate and it really really hurts, sometimes I pee myself. So I'll just bring underwear so I can change after my session.
Wow.
Yeah. In retrospect, not the smartest decision, but at the time I was like, ball is ball, baby.
So did you have issues beforehand in your lumbar spine with like any like bulging discs or anything like that? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, like the first time I, now knowing the signs and symptoms of like a lumbar spine injury or disc injury, um, first time I had it was I was doing sprints in high school and I overstrode, so like I ended up having, like at the end of a sprint, I ended up like having my foot land super far out in front of me as I was slowing down, and then that, ground reaction force like up into my low back because that was an extension because I didn't know how to run yet. Boom, blew my back up. And then I went to a local chiropractor who didn't ever do any actual assessment or determination of what was going on. She's like, "Oh, it's your SI," and she was like one of those chiros where it's like a 2 minute appointment. So she just kept doing lumbar spine rolls and SI adjustments, and it just never got better. And I was having like tingling down my leg and numbness in my foot, and like all of these signs of like a pretty decent back injury. Um, and she just kept doing that, kept doing that, kept doing that, and I just like was dumb, so I kept squatting and deadlifting and doing Bulgarians, and it eventually went away. But I've had issues with it off and on since 2008.
What's the pain levels like these days?
Not bad. Like I deadlifted yesterday, and I have like a little bit of tightness in the back of my calf, and my low back on that side is, I don't know, like a 1 or a 2 out of 10. Like it's mostly like in my hip, referring into my back, so it's like really not bad. Um, like this is my normal level of fucked up after deadlifting. Like it's nothing I'm concerned about.
Do you what level like where do you stand on like with something like regret in life? Is there a part of you
None.
that ever feels yeah,
No,
you don't feel like you'd like to take any of that back?
no, no, not at all. I think it's one of those things where regret oftentimes, um, I don't know, it's just kind of like a bitch made thing to do. It's like, dude, it already happened, and it was, it could be shitty, it could be upsetting, it could be not fun, it could be uncomfortable, but like you did it, right? And you can't undo it. And regret is this, by definition, this like thinking or hoping or wanting that you can go back into the past and make a different decision. It's like, but you can't do that. You legit, like, there's no way in the world that you can do that. So you just have to do the work on accepting that it happened and just moving the fuck on. Because the longer you sit in regret and the longer you sit in this idea of like, oh fuck, I wish I had made a different choice. It's like, okay, well now you're just not accepting it at all. And that's definitely not how you move through something.
So what about from like an analytical standpoint though? Like if someone was to be like, would you do that again? Rather than sort of saying like, oh, would you change it if you could? Is there more of like an approach? Like let's say you didn't go back, but for whatever reason, I mean, I feel like to an extent you're already doing that, right? Because to an extent, you would be trying to lift as heavy as you used to if you were willing to put yourself through the same problem, but you don't now, right? Because you don't want to make problems worse.
Yeah, I mean, not really, right? So like when Kevin was here, like I was like, yeah, fuck it. Like you're deadlifting and I'll warm up, see what I can do. And then like I was able to pull 225 after not really deadlifting since I got hurt. But even like, the last injury, which was probably the worst one that I had, like there were so many wonderful things that came out of it. And in retrospect, all of these like difficult experiences that I've had, there's been so many wonderful things that have come out of it. Um, that to go back and take those things away would similarly also eliminate all of the blessings that came as a result of that.
It's an interesting outlook, especially considering what you've dealt with. Over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Um, I I want to really kind of hear about that and keep going into this because it's something that I may be having a little bit of an experience with myself,
Sure.
going through some scans, things like that, and I'm kind of, I guess, interested in the mindset behind it because I know that you have a, I don't know, we're gonna say it like my mum would have said it to me when I was younger. You have a way about you, Stuart, and it makes doesn't sound man. Then that way it doesn't sound bad, but you
Yeah.
have a way of an approach to things that's, I guess, what you would. I don't like the word stoic, but I would say it's like it's in that direction,
Hmm.
and it's a good. I think that it's a good way to be because, as you said, having, I guess, constant reservations isn't really something that inspires confidence. But the knees was a big thing, and I also
Yes.
recently saw the video, which I guess I don't know what I was expecting. I don't know if I was expecting your knees to actually explode, but I'm really confused by the injury. Even I was reading the post and stuff, but I've just never heard anything like it.
Yeah. So, to kind of give you a background, so the summer prior, um, so I don't know, probably 12 months before that, 13 months before that, um, I had like a weird rep of a deficit deadlift. And it came off and I was like, oh, like my knee feels really bad. And it was that right knee. And then my wife did an assessment. She's like, oh, you're missing like a centimeter and a half of like your infrapatellar ligament, which is like your patellar tendon. And she's like, on the medial portion, like it just snapped, like it's not there anymore. I was like, huh. And like I had a similar pain before, and that side, that infrapatellar ligament too, had always had like a hole in the middle, like you could feel an indentation. So it was definitely like the weaker of the two. And I just took a fucking ass load of BPC, and it was fine 2 weeks later. And I was like, oh, whatever. Like it grew back, like you could visibly and then via palpation see that part filled in. I was like, okay, whatever, I'm good. It doesn't hurt anymore. And that meet that it happened in is first and second attempt went really well, and then I think I made the fundamental mistake that most powerlifters do, which is like, oh, first two went really well, I'm gonna fucking turn it up for the third one, and then you get so hyped that you just revert back to monkey brain and you lose all the technical improvements you made over the last 2 years with regards to your squat. Um, and then essentially I hit the bottom and I felt the right one start to go. And I was like, whatever, this is just like last time. I'm just going to stand up. I'm just going to have a fucked up knee and I'm going to be fine. And I got about 80% of the way up. And then that's when that right one fully ruptured, which is why the foot came off the ground. Right. So essentially, like, because that extensor mechanism was gone in the right leg, that hamstring is also contracting. Hamstring pulls the leg back. And then I unloaded 100% of that load of that leg into the other leg. And then the other ligament tore.
Yeah, wow. I think maybe it's just the history of injuries and things like that that created some kind of extreme thought pattern in my brain when I heard about it. And I was a little bit like, oh, because we've all seen those horrible videos where people, Ed Cohen had a real bad one back in the day. And, so to me, it was kind of one of those things where I guess it was still horrible, but lucky kind of that you were able to even stand up. I kind of, I guess, was my thought process. I was like, it's crazy to think that happened and you were still able to kind of fully stand up. I guess, like, to me, I would have
Yeah,
the
well,
thought.
it's a weird one too because it happened so much higher up in the movement than anyone's ever seen.
Mm,
Um, and it was just like this. In actuality, what I should have done is like when I hit the bottom and I felt that wobble and I felt that knee start to go, has been like take it because in actuality I would have never had surgery. Um, but I had the wherewithal, not necessarily wherewithal, because in retrospect it was a retarded decision. To be like, fuck it, I fucked my knee up before, baller's ball, let's fucking do this. And then yeah, it fucking snapped the top. And then obviously there was that max effort sissy squat.
mm, yeah, it's I'm. What was the pain like? Like you
So
mentioned one or two with your back before. Like, are we talking 8 or 9 or 10?
no, after surgery, probably an 8 or a 9. When it happened, there wasn't any pain unless I moved. So when I fell, um, the bar fell behind me, and the head judge, Lloyd, God bless him, and he actually showed me afterwards, he had had a double knee replacement. He was like, I know exactly the pain you're going through, brother. And he caught me. And so I'm like sitting there, knees bent, nothing's attached. And he's like holding me like under my arms. And I remember looking at my wife and I was like, Jem, what do I do? And she's sitting in the front row. And I like traumatized the fuck out of her. And she's like, we have to get you up. And so they bunch of guys come over and they stand me up, and then my legs go straight, and then my quads spasm because they're trying to extend my leg, but there's no extensor mechanism. And so they carried me over to a bench, they sat me down, and because I was in shock, I was actually in pretty good spirits. It was like I was like making jokes, and like my coach called me because he saw it on the stream, and he was like, dude, what the fuck happened? I was like, I don't know, man, but the ambulance is here, so I'll talk to you later, dude. Like, I was just like, whatever. And like, I fucking took like a photo in the ambulance with the ambulance driver, and I was like, yeah, it's looking like this. And it didn't hurt at all unless I moved. And got to the hospital, gave me the MRI, and they're like, oh yeah, it's rupture of both patellar tendons. And I was like, okay. And then it didn't really sink in until they said it was both patellar tendons and that I needed to have surgery on both knees. And I was having surgery the next day or the day after. And I'd never had, like, aside from mouth surgery, I'd never had an actual surgery. And I was like, oh, fuck. And then I remember I was, like, still in the ER. So I was in one of the rooms in the ER. And, like, very close friends of ours had come to see us. And they're religious as well. And I just, like, completely broke down. And in that moment, the only thing that I could think to do, I was like, because Skylar is like the worship leader at his church. And I was like, can you pray for me right now? Like, I'm too emotional to pray. And we all locked hands and we prayed. And I just like felt this just like complete overwhelming peace. And I like stopped crying. And I was like, okay, I can fucking do this. And then they wheeled me up to pre-op, which was floor 8. And then I was there until surgery, and then a couple days after, and then I got into inpatient rehab. And pre-op was completely fine. Post-op was like really fucking hard.
This podcast is sponsored by Power Pit Rockingham, and Power Pit Rockingham is probably the best gym for you to train in if you are in Rockingham and want access to quality powerlifting equipment and a good environment to train in when it comes to powerlifting training or bodybuilding training. If you are in the area and want to do so, pop on down to Power Pit Rockingham, jump in for a casual session, and tell them that the Porta Potty sent you.
Because turns out some people just don't get any pain management from opiates. Like, it just doesn't do anything. And so the next morning, once the nerve block wore off, I was in probably the worst pain I've ever been in. And the thing too is, like, any pain that I've ever had up to that point, like, there was positions of relief, right? It's like, if you tear your pec, if you just like kind of sit like this and don't do anything, your pec doesn't hurt, right? It's like, I broke my shoulder blade in 2014 and I dislocated my shoulder and stuff. And like, if I didn't do anything that used that shoulder, it didn't hurt. But this pain like didn't go away. There was no reprieve from it. And because those opiates weren't really doing anything, like, they kept giving me like Dilaudid, morphine, and hydrocodone and all this different stuff. And I was just getting a fever and my pain just kept going up. And I was like, something's really wrong. Like, this is really, really, really not good. And it was like that from probably 6 a.m. until 2 or 3 p.m. And I'm like sweating. They have to take my gown off, and I'm just like laying in bed naked, like sweating uncontrollably. And the day nurse at one point was like, I know you've had a bad reaction to Toradol, but you did it orally. Do you mind if we give you like Toradol in your drip, in your IV? I was like, at this point, I'm willing to try anything. And she did it, and 30 minutes later, my pain went from like a 9 to a 2. And I was like, oh. And then I talked to my mom about it. She's like, oh yeah, opiates don't work for me or your brother either. And I was like, why the fuck would you not tell me that?
Jesus. Yeah, that's... Oh, wow. I've not heard of... What did you just say? Toradol?
Toradol. So it's you probably have a different name for it in Australia, but it's like a super, super, super anti-inflammatory.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. No, I've not any. No, I haven't had experience with that. We had a pretty strong nerve pain drug getting around here for a while that people started abusing pretty badly. It was called like Lyrica, and that used to like that has does something to like nerve pain or something like that. And that was one of the strongest like those related things I've had. I tried opiates and stuff before, but in
Hmm.
their anti-inflammatory kind of like nerve region is pretty foreign to me. That's why I probably hadn't heard of that one. And maybe we do have the same name for it here. I'll have to look that up because
It's
I'm curious.
so I looked it up in Australia. It's called Ketorolac trametamol. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah, can't say that's in my my vocabulary. But I haven't had anything serious as well. Like I've never like broken a bone or anything, so I haven't
Pretty
experienced
lucky.
that yet. Well, yeah, I mean, I would try not to, but I mean, you'd mentioned before about like running, and we were talking about things like that, and it's so different over in the States. Like we talk about this all the time. Like you must have grown up so much more exposed to it. Like what age did you even start lifting?
I was a late bloomer. I think I started at 15.
Yeah,
Um,
that's early here.
yeah, so I think I started at 15. I started because I was playing football and I was like 65 kilos. And I was like, okay, I probably need to gain some weight. And then by the grace of God, I hit puberty the next year. So I went from like 5'4" to 6 foot in 18 months. And then I ended up graduating high school at like 105 kilos. So lifting weights worked.
It does work. What's the heaviest you've ever been?
131, 132.
Jesus. Yeah, that sounds uncomfortable.
It's not good. I was actually telling Kevin about this. So breakfast was like 200 grams of oats, some nut butter, a couple scoops of protein powder. Then I had 4 meals of 400 grams of rice, 250 grams of cooked chicken breast, and then my dinner was usually like a full pizza. I did that for like 8 weeks.
Ugh. Yeah, that's the thing that no one ever talks about is the shitting. You know?
It's the absolute worst part about it. And
Mm.
your fucking butthole gets like raw from wiping.
Yeah, dude. I don't know if this is an old person thing. I just turned 29, so I'm getting there. You know.
Mhm.
And in the last 2 years, I discovered like wet wipes. I don't know why I didn't think they existed. Game changer. I don't know what I've been doing my whole life. I
Yeah,
I
yeah.
bulked I bulked without wet wipes, man. I was bulking hard without wet wipes. I don't know why. They've always been available. It's just a choice, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I just should have looked around more. Life could have been a lot easier, you know. So but
Before I met my wife, like in you don't realize how much your life improves once you have a woman in your life. I just did the dumbest shit. You know what I mean? Like I was just like, whatever. I have one bowl for eating, so I just wash the bowl in between. And then if I'm eating the same meal twice, I don't need to wash the bowl because I'm using the same condiments. So what's the fucking big deal? Like complete ape behavior. And then she's like, oh, like we're going to buy multiple plates and multiple bowls and multiple utensils. And then when you use something, you put it in the dishwasher, you wash it, and it's just like, monkey no use dishwasher. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would probably still be doing shit like that if I wasn't married.
what do you reckon's the most ape shit you ever did when you like lived alone or when you were single? I've definitely got some up my sleeve. What's up there for you? What's something that was like real bad?
I used to set alarms in the night to wake up to eat. So I was like, because if I didn't have my last meal because my stomach was too upset, I'd be like, well, I'll just wake up in 3 hours and eat again. And I would like prep it before I went to bed and just leave it on the counter. And then I would just like get up, put it in the microwave, take it out, eat it, go back to bed.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I've got one along the lines of this then. I have a sleep eating problem, which I don't know where it came from. About 4 years ago, I realized that I would just find myself in the kitchen at 2 o'clock in the morning and I would just eat like 3 LCMs and then go back to bed.
Dude, it's
So
I had a I had a I had a client for a long time who had these like he made these like date bars that were like 1,100 calories each. It's like dates and macadamia nuts and walnuts and nut butter and like all kinds of really crazy shit. And he'd like get up in the middle of the night and eat two of them, and then he'd like send me his weight every week, and he was gaining like 2 kilos a week for like a month. And I was like, dude, what are you doing? And he's like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, but like every night I get up and like those date bars I have for breakfast, like yeah, I like eat like two of them, and like I don't even know that I do it. I just wake up and I count. There's less of them. And I was like, okay, well you need to lock your bedroom door so that there's at least some intermediate thing where you have to like turn the knob and then open the door, and then hopefully you wake up by that point. Um, and I was like, and if you can't do that, don't have the date bars in the house. Have another breakfast. And it was bad too because he got up to like 122 kilos and he was supposed to be competing at 110.
Jesus.
And we were like a month out and he's 122 kilos. And I was like, what the fuck have you done? He's like, yeah, sorry, man. It was the date bars.
No, I don't feel like those things should exist. Like that blows my mind that we have gotten to a point where we've managed to create things that are so calorically dense that like our bodies are flat out refusing it. Like there's some intense stuff. We don't have what you guys have over there. America's, I imagine way more intense. We have Cinnabon here, and I went and tried it the other. It's fucking disgusting, but I mean, I'd probably eat it again. But you know what I mean. Like, but it was like this is slop. This is bad food.
We
Um,
have a grocery store here called Publix, and they have something called the Pub Sub. And it is, you call them, I don't know if you call them chicken fingers or chicken tenders. And it's cut up chicken tenders, like they mince them up, and then they cover them in buffalo sauce and ranch dressing, and then they put cheese on it, and then they put it in the microwave and cook it on a sub, and then
Jesus.
that's the sub that you eat, and it's like 2,700 calories.
Wow. That yeah. That's. I mean, I feel like people like because the whole my understanding is the whole like caloric density thing came from like not probably primarily, but like war, right? Like war was a time where we were like, all right, we need to figure out how to jam heaps of shit into something we can wrap in something so that when you're like fucked for 3 days and you're like sleeping in holes and fighting people, you need to be able to like eat something that's got a decent amount of calories in it. So like I understand it from that standpoint, but it was almost like from that we were like, wow, we can really put a lot of fucking calories in something. Let's play with that. And now we're at a point where like we have these things here at like a Whole Foods place from us called cookie boats, and it's like this big, and it essentially is just like 7 different chocolate things melted and then like frozen, like or like refrigerated, so they've hardened, and then you microwave it so it becomes sludge again and eat it. Yeah, so you like the sound of it, I can tell. Oh, they're great, but I'm like, there's got to be like 2,000 calories in this thing, and it's fucking tiny, right? It's yeah,
I had a really, really good friend of mine who was a roommate, and he was in the British Army, and they had these MREs, and there was this like little cube in the MRE, and it was like a bread cube, and he didn't know that you were supposed to like put it in a little bit of water and then heat it up, and it turned into like a small loaf of bread that was like 800 calories, and he loved the taste of them. And so when everyone be eating their MREs, no one wanted to eat them. He's like, dude, I'll fucking eat all these. So he'd have like 7 or 8 a day. And he did that for like 3 or 4 days, and then he couldn't shit. And then he goes up to his sergeant and he's like, dude, like I cannot poop. And he's like, dude, it's because you've been eating all that fucking bread. And he's like, what do you mean? They're like this fucking big. And he's like, no, that blows up to like a loaf of bread. And you've been eating 8 of those a day. Like, and he had such bad stomach pain that he goes to the medic and they had to give him an enema. And he's like, dude, I shit out like probably 45 loaves of bread. I was like, hell yeah, dude.
Dude, people, you know what? Sometimes it's just interesting to hear people survive stuff. Like, I don't know. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like, 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 It's just the stuff we get away with is wild. And then, you know, some people get killed by vending machines, so it's just wild. We live in an interesting world. I have to ask, actually, speaking about stuff that can kill people, we don't have something that you guys have lots of over there. And I heard that you're a really big fan of them. I'm of course, talking about automatic weapons and firearms.
Yes,
We have
dude.
we have none of them here. I've only shot like 3 in my life.
Well, because there was that big mass shooting you guys at Port something in like the late '90s.
I don't like to brag about it, but we still hold the record. I think Tasmania is still the highest one, which is so annoying because I feel like there's been like hundreds in America, but we had one, and we apparently now can't have guns here at all, which I don't understand.
Yeah, well, you know what? We had in Iraq and Afghanistan, so don't be fucking too high on yourselves.
Okay, all right, okay. Well, it's not a competition, all right, Stu. But look, to be fair, you guys had the Vegas thing. That was pretty wild.
Dude, have you ever gone down the rabbit hole in the Vegas thing?
I have not gone down the rabbit hole. I mean, dude, I just remember it happening and reading a bit about it. But for me, I think I remember being blown away by. It was like, is it like the death versus the injury ratio on that? Like, didn't he? Wasn't there like 80 people shot or something? But like, I don't want to say only, but didn't like 10 to 15 people die? But he injured like 80 people.
Yeah, because it was from super far away, so he kept like winging people in the foot or the shoulder. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
Supposedly, because the big thing about it is he was shooting from like the 20-something floor of like a very large casino, um, like in one of the rooms, and he somehow removed like an 800-pound window and then carried 1,200 pounds of ammunition through the lobby to an elevator up to his room. And then he was also somehow firing at whatever amount of rounds per minute that with the equipment he had wasn't possible. So there was like a bunch of stuff where you're like, this is fucking, and they've analyzed the audio, and like a lot of people think that there was two shooters. And so there's like a lot of stuff where you're like, this is not I don't think this is entirely correct or true. Um, not going to come out and say that it's a false flag, but like when you dig into it, you're like, a lot of these things don't add up.
You know that I'm going to brutally edit the fuck out of the context of this and turn it into a massive zoom in, zoom out, like theory video with like intense music behind it. Dude, I'm going to make you sound like a fucking nut. I can't wait. It's going to
just don't co-post with me and we're fine.
Damn it. I need your followers, Stu. Otherwise no one will see it and they won't crack the case. How are we going to know?
Dude, yeah, there's a fair amount of things like that too, where like we had this horrible mass shooting in Canada right at the beginning of COVID, like April of 2020, and it was a very similar thing, which was the guy who did it somehow ended up with like a police car and a police uniform, and then like 2 weeks before it, the largest news magazine in the country called Maclean's, they had reported that 2 weeks before it, he was given like $500,000 from a Brinks depot. And then like the RCMP, which is our federal police force, said that like the only people that get paid money like that are like people who do work for the RCMP. And then somehow he ends up with an RCMP uniform and an RCMP car and then drives around rural Nova Scotia for 24 hours shooting people and lighting their houses on fire. And then he gets killed. And then the next day they ban like 8,000 firearms. And you're like, I don't know what's going on here, but this is fucking fishy and stinky. And then there was never a report released about it.
Yeah, that's maybe it's a good thing we don't have guns here. It sounds like maybe they're I don't know. There's pros and cons maybe.
Well, I think it's if the government is willing to kill millions of Iraqi citizens for weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist and to depose a dictator that actually probably stabilized the region, they're probably willing to kill 50 or 60 of their own civilians to push some kind of agenda.
Boom. Yeah, look, I'm not going to disagree with you on that one. I have a question though, because we don't have them here. You got so many automatic weapons over there. I feel like you guys have more automatic ones than not automatic ones, right?
Yeah.
And why does nobody? And here's the thing, right? I'm not trying to make light of it. That guy that did the sniping thing, why does nobody just? Maybe I've watched Resident Evil too many times, right? Just two extended mags on automatic pistols just at a music festival. You know, you don't even have to aim. Why does no one do it that way? Why? I just find it interesting when people do these shootings. They always take this kind of like Call of Duty approach. Maybe I'm being unrealistic. I feel like you'd get way more people that way. I always find it interesting, you know, but maybe I don't understand guns.
So if we go from the initial premise that maybe it wasn't him or wasn't just him,
Mm-hmm.
if he's there and then he gets shot by police, right? But if he's somewhere else and maybe he was paid to do it XYZ, right? Then he can be the patsy. Then a lot of these things don't make sense. But it's like if he's shot in the middle of a crowd of 20,000 people and everyone sees it, it's much harder to not, to
This podcast is sponsored by PedTest Australia. If you plan on using or are currently using performance-enhancing drugs, it is very important that you make sure you are doing so, having them been tested before you use them or while you are using them to make sure that you take care of your health. And you can also recommend that the people around you do so as well. Go to PedTest Australia on Instagram to find out more about the details on how you can test your current performance-enhancing drugs that you are using, or you can find out more about testing other compounds or things that you are putting in your body if you would like to make sure that you take care of your health.
Cover those things up because everyone's seen it. Everyone's witnessed.
Interesting. Do you share these opinions at barbecues?
Here's the thing is I exist in this very interesting sphere of people where a lot of my friends share similar opinions and a lot of my friends are pretty anti-government. A lot of my friends are pretty like, think about it.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's not even that I share these opinions because also like, if you're not like super left-leaning and super pro-government and super like, I don't know, Australian for lack of a better term, you kind of have this like inherent distrust of government. And you're like, yeah, they'd probably fucking do it. You know what I mean? Yeah, they'd probably fucking do it. It's like, I don't know if they did, but they'd probably fucking do it.
Yeah, I mean, here we definitely like. I don't know. I guess I'm being. I'm with you on that. Here we're really weird. We have like a bit too much trust and everything, and but then also people are a little bit less. They're better at seeming less corrupt because less goes on. We're like over there, like I don't. This is a big conversation to start, but like to us, it's hilarious that someone like Donald Trump exists, right? Because we have like people that are like prime ministers and stuff here, but they're all like, yes, we're here to talk about the government and the legislation. They're all like very serious and they don't really get caught up in too much. Maybe a little bit of like racketeering or something. And no one talks about that. No one's walking around like talking about like grabbing people by pussy, grabbing pussies and doing weird stuff. Like no one does any of that. And like to us, it looks like a movie. To like America seems crazy to us, but maybe it's
I think the rise of populism, and I think the fundamental misunderstanding people have behind populism is it can only exist and it only arises because there is this complete discontentment with the current pecking order or the current system that's in place, right? And so 2016 was a really interesting moment in politics because Donald Trump, like I remember the debate where he killed Hillary Clinton. I was like, oh, you just won the election. Because he was responding to a question about his tax returns, right? Because he's gotten a tax refund every year as opposed to paying taxes, because in 2008 he had so many losses, and you can carry those forward for I think 10 years. And so if you lose fucking $50 bajillion in 2008, like you probably don't need to pay taxes for a while. Like my buddy's dad just started paying taxes again from a dissolution of a company he had in 2015. And it's like the U.S. tax code is like very set up for business owners, and it's meant to allow you to do those sorts of things. And he says, yeah. And he's like, and I understand the U.S. tax code better than anyone who's ever run for president. And he's like, and Hillary Clinton for the last 20 years has been able to close those tax loopholes and has been able to do something about it but she doesn't because all of her donors use the exact same loopholes. And it was the first time a political candidate had pulled back that veil and had been like, you fucking people have had the ability to make actual change for the last 20, 30, 40 years, and none of you have done anything because you're just fattening your own pocketbooks and you don't actually give a fuck about anyone but yourself. And so when we think about why he came to power in 2016, when we think about why he got reelected in 2024, is because we had him. Things were actually really not that bad, right? And things actually ended up doing pretty well until COVID, obviously. And then the next guy gets in, things get measurably worse in every single regard. Whether you think that's through his presidency or the trickle down effects of printing a huge sum of money during COVID to get the country through. And that by 2024, people were like, yo, this did not fucking work with this guy. Once again, Trump is the only person that's actually speaking to us. All of these people, all these other people are being just like pretentious cocks. And they're like, you shouldn't care about that. You should care about this, right? It's like, okay, but you're not speaking to me. You're not speaking to the issues that I'm having, as a parent who can't put food on the table for my children. So, and even like him going on Joe Rogan, right? Is like, that's the first time in history he's like, a president has like sat down with Joe Rogan and had a conversation. And it was like a very open and honest conversation. There were points in it too where like he even conceded, he's like, I made poor decisions in 2016 with regards to my transition team and with regards to the people that I had elected to, Secretary of Defense or whatever. And I was surrounded by bad people and I'm not going to do that again. Like he was cognizant of his mistakes and he was cognizant of the fact that like he had made poor decisions. And I was like, oh, there's some introspection here. It's not like an externalizing of failures. And so I think, the problem that happens when you don't live in a country and you're looking at their politics was like from the outside in. When I look at what happened in Australia during COVID, I was like, dude, you guys went fucking nuts. And then when Casey was moving there, I was like, Casey, like, you got to be safe. Like, these people are fucking insane. And then she's like, no, it's not like that. I promise. And in actuality, it wasn't like that. But we're only seeing these sensationalist headlines reported. So I was like, oh, they're putting you in camps. This is nuts. You got to fight back. That's why you don't have guns, brother. They wanted to fucking put you in camps. And so, and that's just what happens, right? Is you see these like huge sensationalist headlines and you're in actuality seeing things that are not congruent with reality or not congruent with the entire situation reported. You're like, holy fuck, this place is insane. And in actuality, it's like when you look at it, and when I lay out that context for you, you're probably like, oh, yeah, it makes perfect sense why he got elected.
Yeah, I mean, I just found the whole Biden thing funny because to me it was like, and so for me, I just laughed at that and then people would assume straight away like, oh, what do you think Donald Trump should have? And I'm like, I don't have enough information to say that like that would have been better. This is just hilarious. Like I would have loved to see Biden go on Joe Rogan.
Dude.
Like that.
I don't know.
He just would have been so confused, right? Like he just would have been like, well, the thing about macaroni cheese is the cat whistles when the wind blows. Like you're like, what the fuck are you talking? And then he'd probably end up in the corner trying to put like a photo frame and a toaster or something. Like I could not believe how like old that guy was and just like incoherent. He had no idea. Every clip I saw of him, I thought was edited, and none of them were. Like
this is the best part. Post election, somehow he magically doesn't have issues anymore.
Really?
Dude, I watched his address talking about like a peaceful transition of power. It was 25 minutes long. He did not stumble over his words once. He did not trail off once. He did not have a single issue. And I was like, oh, this motherfucker threw the election. He was like, fuck you, Kamala. I don't like you. I don't like any of you motherfuckers. Fuck you.
Well, this is the other thing, right? It's, as you said, from perspectives too. We've gone way off course here anyway, but fuck it, we're here now. The whole Kamala thing, I was like, I tried to kind of like look into that, but I'm like, I was like the default. I was like, Donald Trump's the only one I know who it is. I don't know who this chick is. Everything that I'm like trying to watch to find out more about is just getting more confusing. And the there was so much negativity around her anyway that everything I came across was in some way kind of negative. And I'm like, I'm glad that I'm not over there and have to vote, because that would just confuse me. Here's really simple, right? Because when you like, here is like, I sometimes there's not even another person really. Like there is, but not really. It's not like we have like two people who it's like, wow, we really got to decide. Usually there's just like one guy, and you're like, and you're like, yeah, okay, I guess you seem good enough. Like it's not as much of a thing here. Where over there, obviously, like I remember, as you said, right? Like we used to see clips and shit of Obama, and we were like, I remember thinking like he seemed pretty good. Like that guy was like, and then I like spoke to someone once and was like, you know that uh, he wasn't, right? And I'm like, oh, but he seemed like a really good president. And they were like, no, like some of the stuff that he did while he was the president, or some of the policies or whatever. And I think we were pretty drunk when we were having the conversation, but they kind of made me realize like, oh, wow, I kind of just looked at this dude who was well-spoken from this like massive, like far away land where I have no idea what's going on. And I was like, oh, he seems like a really appropriate president. Like, I don't understand why people have an issue, you know, but like,
Yeah. I mean, he somehow won a Nobel Peace Prize while blowing up more kids in Yemen than any president before him.
yeah,
And
wow.
it's yeah, and I think the thing too is like the political system, however you look at it, like people who are attracted to positions like that are probably not people who are the most honest or upright or upstanding. And I think in actuality, when you have people who like do have people's best interests at heart and do get into politics for that reason, um, they get pushed out because they get in group out grouped. It's like you're like all the other like career politicians are like, you're not like us, and it's like, yeah, but that's a good thing because you guys suck.
That's a, yeah. I mean, I guess I don't follow it closely enough, but like I said, I hear we don't have to, man. We're just like weird here. Like there's all kinds of weird stuff that's happened here. Like I don't know if you heard gel blasters got made illegal here. Did you ever hear about those things? They're
Gel
like,
blasters, like the little fucking
yeah, because like if you, I mean, and I'm quoting this as like a dumb bogan who heard from another dumb bogan in Australia, like this is how it is, and I just took that information and went, that's 100% true, fucking right there, right? And so apparently you get done with a gun charge here. So if you get caught with a gel blaster, it's actually they'll treat it like it's an actual weapon here. So you would actually be done with a gun charge, even though it's not a real gun, like it's literally a toy, right?
except for Queensland, all other states and territories ban gel blasters outright or require a firearms license to possess them.
Except for Queensland. And then weirdly enough, I'm pretty sure that prostitution is policed over there, like it's not legal. But in Western Australia, we just like let it happen. It's like you can,
You also have banned BB guns in Australia.
yeah. It's weird, man. And we just banned vaping as well. Vaping, I mean, which is not probably the worst thing, but it's just like it's weird that we banned it because smoking is like obviously still completely legal. And yeah,
It's like when New Zealand like made smoking illegal.
yeah, like that was gonna last.
Well, it's like what why do you fucking care? Like, and the thing too is like I think the primary issue that I have with a lot of that kind of stuff is it's just like, dude, it's hurting you, right? Like you're not gonna ban high calorie foods in a supermarket because a bunch of people will get fat, right? But it's like, oh, but we're okay with policing this one aspect, oh, but not this aspect. And it's like, okay, but you will eventually get to that other point, right? You're eventually going to be like, well, you know, these fat people are too much of a drain on a healthcare system, so we're going to eliminate high calorie options in the grocery store so that we can lower the rates of obesity, so there's not so much of a drain on our public healthcare system. It's like, and then it's like, oh, actually, you know what? We found that it's probably better if we just give you the food and make sure that you're not eating in a calorie surplus. And it's like, oh my fucking, like it's just like it gets really dystopian really fast, and then people call me crazy for that. I'm like, okay, but there's a really slippery slope that we fell down in the last 30 years to get to here, and no one said that here would happen, so shut the fuck up.
I think COVID changed a lot as well. It made like a lot of people realize like, wow, we really can have shit like controlled on like a really high, like a large scale. And this is completely irrelevant, but it did a lot of damage to the film industry for me. And I am a really big movie buff, and I was kind of pissed about that. Movies have not been the same since COVID. So I know a lot of people were injured during that time and people died and stuff. And obviously that's horrible. And I had some friends that go through some shit. And I understand there's all of that. All I'm saying is movies are nowhere near as good as they were. And I just want to point it out. Because,
Honestly, they're not. And I think okay, so I got a question for you. So you're a big film buff, right? So like, what are some of your favorite directors?
Are we going directors?
Mm-hmm. Because I need to know what kind of film you appreciate. So top 3 directors.
Top 3 directors. I can't I feel like I can't not say Ridley Scott just because there's too many good ones. Nailing it down to 3 is really hard. I'm going to say what's on my mind, but I would probably change it under more. I'm going to leave like Christopher Nolan out of it, even though I want to say Christopher Nolan, but he would be in there. But I'm thinking more like probably Robert Zemeckis and Edgar Wright.
Okay. So this segues really nicely because this is such an American thing. What is your perspective on Marvel movies?
Oh, okay. We're going down this. I like it. Okay. So good. So basically the way you wouldn't have asked me this question if I couldn't name a director, because if I couldn't name a director, there was probably a high chance that I liked Marvel movies, right?
Yes.
Here's the thing. There's some that I enjoy and will always enjoy. I went to go see Iron Man when I was 10 years old in the cinema, and I liked it, and I genuinely think that it was a good movie. Mm-hmm. But when I say good movie, I very strongly mean just good. Mm-hmm. And I would say for the most part, they don't have the thing that I look for when I watch a film. And it's not that I need something to be massively indie and kind of like all kind of weird. But for me, a movie has an element of escapism, and I have a pretty strong attention to detail. So I run off how a movie makes me feel a lot of the time. And for me, I find that Marvel movies are very artificial, and they've gotten worse over the years. And they're probably at a point now where, other than Deadpool, just because it's funny and I enjoy it, I just haven't really been able to watch anything in probably about 5 years. Like I haven't probably seen anything.
Yeah, a really good barometer or metric for me, if I'm gonna like get along well with a person, is if they're like really, really into Marvel movies. I'm like, oh, you're an NPC. Like, you have no deeper thought about anything, and like you're the kind of person. Like, have you ever seen WALL-E?
I actually haven't. I've heard it's great though.
It's okay. So I actually did I actually wrote a paper in college on like the religious undertones in WALL-E, because there's actually a lot of like religious stuff in WALL-E, a lot of Christian stuff in WALL-E.
Okay.
But like there's these people in WALL-E who are just like, they're so fat that they like sit in these chairs, and they're just like fed, and they just like are on this cruise ship, and they just like sleep in the chair, and then they wake up, and then they get fed, and then they just like drive around in their chairs. They don't ever walk. Everyone's super fat and ugly. And I'm like, if there's enough people who like Marvel movies, like that's what our future is.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to, I feel like you seem like the kind of guy that would have seen Idiocracy. Have you seen it?
We watched it like again like 2 months ago.
Yeah. So like that, it's the quotable thing that we talk about here, like with a couple of people that I know that have seen it, just because it's like, it was hilarious the first time you watched it, and then like there's almost an element of like depressingness. Like it's not like, it's like almost like, fuck, this is like, we're kind of halfway, we're maybe even like 3/4 to this like already. This podcast is sponsored by Bulk Gym Chalk. Do you struggle to hold on to your deadlifts? If so, it can be very important to make sure that you have good quality chalk and access to that chalk. So go to Bulk Gym Chalk. You can find them on Instagram and get yourself some good quality chalk so that you can make sure that you can train in the gym and get the best out of your training while doing so. It's bad.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too is like, I mean, obviously a lot of that is like a damning indictment of the education system. And like even in university, like I remember like by my last year of university, I was like, oh, like none of you people have the capacity for critical thinking. Like you're just like taking whatever the professor's saying at face value, and you're not being like running it through the filter of your own like morals or values. You're like, this is the answer. It's like, oh, you've been spoon fed everything in your entire life. Like your parents did everything for you. Like you were not meant to do anything on your own. And then as an aside, you now have no opinion of your own.
Yeah, that's more and more common these days. I think I find with people, it's really hard to have conversations because people I'm probably like renowned for being, I would say, somewhat annoying, simply just because I enjoy when someone says something I disagree with, and I'm like, fuck yeah, let's talk about it. And they're like, no, we don't have to talk about it. We disagree. And I'm like, no, but that's the only reason I want to talk about it because I want to know why you think that. And I'm like,
All right, here's okay. So you're a disagreeable person, which is a wonderful trait, right? Because the world doesn't get pushed forward by agreeable people. What's a strong opinion you have that most people don't share?
fuck. I feel like I want to have a really good answer for this, but for some reason, okay. I feel like I need a Kickstarter thought here. There's definitely some, but for whatever reason, because we've kind of just been talking about a couple of things, I've struggled with it. Okay. I don't know. This might be a bad example. So this is all I can think of. We were talking about religion earlier. So I strongly believe. Oh, this is actually pretty controversial. Okay, everyone talks about aliens and shit. I'm not saying they don't exist, right? I believe that human connection and connecting with one another is the entire point of like existence. So people are always asking for the meaning of life, and I don't actually think there is one. I actually think that I think there is, but I think that is the reason. I think people are like, oh, we're not all just here for the sake of being here. I disagree with that strongly. Like, I believe the whole point is to exist and to connect with one another and like inhabit the planet and like share a connection, because I believe that if that wasn't the case, it just makes no sense that we're all even on the same planet. We might as well just all have one each. Not saying that would be realistic or even make sense, but I just mean we're all here, and that's kind of the point. And it's the whole reason I started this, because I started it during COVID, and I felt like connection was being lost. So people will argue with me, right? Like, dude, there's got to be more, man. There's like bacteria out there there's like a fucking universe on a fucking piece of shit. And I'm like, look, I'm not saying that stuff doesn't exist. I just think that I don't think there's anything more than that. I think that human connection is the point, and I believe that that's why most people end up feeling purposeless, because they actually spend so much time focusing on the bigger picture when there isn't one, and then they actually miss the whole point.
Yeah, and I think it's similarly twofold. And one in the regard that like I would extrapolate that further in the regard that I think it's not just connection. I think a lot of it's service, right? Like a lot of people live a very aimless life where they take and take and take and take from other people. And then they wonder why they feel emotionally vacant at 40. And it's like, because you've never been a giver. You've never helped other people. You've never been of service to others. And I think that robs a person of a lot of their spiritual energy, because that's not what we're meant to do. We're meant to connect and we're meant to serve. And I think marriage really, really taught me that, because it's this continual act on a day to day basis of like providing. And it's this continual act on a day to day basis of being like, what can I do for you? How can I make you feel better? How can I improve your day? And the level of joy and fulfillment I have derived from that is a pretty strong indicator to me that that's probably what we're supposed to be doing. And then you get these people who are so unhappy, and they don't have a partner, and they have a cat, and they're 40 years old, and they wonder where their life went. It's like, because you spent the last 25 years of your life being a dopamine addicted rat chasing whatever made you feel good, and now you're reaping the consequences of that.
Yeah, I agree with that strongly. And I think that especially something like technology, it's like something I've had to address in myself, in realizing that I am happy to be productive and create something, but I have to be very careful not to be a consumer because, yeah, that's what fucks you up. I think, you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's this. I don't know if you've ever seen like the Coomer meme.
No.
Okay, so it's like a pejorative term that my friends and I use for people because you can tell it's like, oh, you're like, there's like two pejoratives. It's like you're Marvel brained, which is like someone who's really into Marvel, right? It's like, oh, you're a fucking NPC. You have no original thought. And then someone who's like a Coomer, which is essentially just like a dopamine rat, which is like the meme is just like this guy who's like got super haggard hair and super haggard like facial hair, and then like one of his arms is super big, and he jerks off like 25 times a day, and it's like super gross. But it's like everyone knows a guy like that, right? Where it's like he's like betting on sports, and then he's like watching porn, and then he's like swiping on Tinder, and then he's like playing video games at the same time, and he's just like so obsessed and consumed with dopamine. Um, and it's just like that's how the West falls. Like that's how we end up in whatever horrible situation idiocracy is.
Yes, yeah, that's what they end up doing, right? And they're all, and it's like horrendous. I mean, I guess so, so the downfall of civilization will be Marvel. That's what we're going with, really.
Marvel and porn addiction, which I feel like go hand in hand.
It's funny that you say that because that's something that I addressed a lot as well in the last couple of years, and I was seeing it everywhere, and people were talking about it. It's crazy. That's such a big conversation. It's actually wild what that shit does to your brain and how it made me view not only females but like myself, and then also my relationship with people, and to the point where I couldn't be alive and go through a day and interact with people or be around like random people in society without just like thinking about that sort of thing with just almost everyone I interacted with. And I yeah, it was a big realization moment for me where I was like, I need to get away from this shit.
Well, the interesting thing about pornography too is that is the only addiction on planet Earth where it's not more, it's different. So the guy that did the Stanford prison experiment also somehow has ended up as like the preeminent researcher on pornography and pornography addiction. And so he has a really interesting TED talk that I'll send you after this, but he talks about like the fundamental differences between pornography addiction and other types of addiction. And like it's literally just because like they're addicted to different and different and more extreme and more extreme and more extreme. And then, like you wonder how like people end up addicted to like all of this insane stuff and insane porn, and you're like, oh, it's because you started with like 11 years old being like guy kisses girl, right, boobs, and then by the time you're 30 it's like toilet hardware amputee porn, scat porn, and you're like, what the fuck.
Dude, you're describing my search bar. I feel it. I feel it.
Yeah, and it's yeah, it's a fucking wild one, and it's so fundamentally like when I meet a guy, like probably in the first 10 minutes I can tell if like they have a problem with porn because there's a way about them. You're like, oh, you like your eyes are darting around, you're looking at every girl, and it's like you're viewing people as like sexual vessels. You're like gross. And you'll appreciate this story. So I had a roommate in college, and he did like trading and stuff. So we had one of those big computer screens, and loved doing coke. And so it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and like I think it was like Friday, so I'd finished class for the day or finished class for the week, and I was like, dude, I'm gonna fucking smoke some weed. And so I go, and I didn't usually knock on his door because he was usually just sitting at his computer trading. And I walk in, and it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he's sniffing coke while watching like tranny scat porn and jerking off. And I was like,
I feel like I can smell it.
oh god. And I was like, this is, he's like, oh fuck, sorry. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And I just like walked out, and we never talked about it, and I never brought it up again. And yeah, I was just like, oh, this is where this goes.
Yeah, that's terrifying. It reminds me. Have you ever seen Black Mirror?
Yes.
they had an episode where I think a guy had worked out there was like an implant or something, and he'd worked out that he could either implant it in someone or he could inject them with something or something, and basically he would then feel what they felt. Have you ever seen it?
I think so.
It
A
gets.
long time ago.
I would never watch it again because it gets horrendous. He basically starts off with like, oh, okay, cool. So like when a girl has, an orgasm, I can feel that. And I have my one wicked. And everybody watching it's like, oh wow, that'd be pretty awesome, right? And then it literally evolves into him stabbing someone because he like just completely desensitizes himself to feeling good and then literally then wants to feel bad. And it's one of the most horrendous things I've ever seen. Like I'd put it up there with like, we talked about this the other day. Have you ever seen like Requiem for a Dream?
Ass to ass, ass to ass.
Like there's just certain things in my life. There's a couple movies like that, or like things I've seen where I'm like, wild experience. Never want to watch that again.
You need to watch a Serbian film.
Dude, it's the only one I haven't seen. Like in terms of like, I've seen like I Spit on Your Grave and like all those like really horrendous like human centipede movies and stuff. But I don't know, man. I've heard it's pretty fucked.
It is. So Bone Tomahawk's like the most gory movie I've ever seen. And that one's pretty good. Probably the worst one in terms of like how it makes you feel is that Serbian film because it's just so grotesque and you're like, it's so disgusting and mortifying and just like horrible in so many ways. And then you're like, oh, this has probably happened.
Yeah, okay. Kind of like Hostile vibes. Like it's a bit, yeah.
Not good. Not good, very
Not
bad.
good. Well, we're talking about really bad movies. I feel like you've gotten an understanding of who I am through movies. I guess I could give you the same question of directors, but I'd also just be curious as to what films that you like. And I often ask people this question. So do you have like 3 top films that you can think of?
Robert Zemeckis, so Forrest Gump. I'd probably say Forrest Gump, Talladega Nights, and then Forrest Gump, Talladega Nights, and then I would say it's got to be something weird. So probably The Fountain by Darren Aronofsky, just because I really like the soundtrack.
I've not seen The Fountain. I will have to add that to my list. We just watched Talladega Nights because my missus didn't want to watch it. And she's like, it seems so dumb and like American and shit. And I'm like, it is, trust me. And we watched it. And she's still not shut up about the fact that it was like one of the funniest movies she's seen. And we're always quoting it. And I always quoted like the shake and bake and all those sorts of things. But I've realized that one of my favorite parts of that movie is actually, and you'll appreciate this, when he's praying at the dinner table. And he's like, I must make sure that each time I pray that I mention Powerade New Mountain Blast, and he's like doing like a Mountain Dew, or like a Powerade advertisement during the prayer, and I lost it, man. That's actually a golden movie. Hey, it's so good,
dude. Yeah, that is like one of the like that era of Will Ferrell, like that in Step Brothers is like, oh my God, like nothing comes like that was peak because like Superbad came out around that time, and then it was like Talladega Nights, and then it was Step Brothers. Like there are
Tropic Thunder,
like there's so that was the last time that movies could just be legitimately offensive.
Well, we had this conversation actually, and my brother made a really good point, and he actually used Tropic Thunder as like almost like a post to basically talk about like, look, kind of around this time is where we sort of lost it. Because even when you go to like 2015, you look at some of the comedies that came out and you kind of find yourself going like, wow, a lot of these weren't actually that funny. Like I wouldn't tell anyone to watch any of these, where everything kind of before that time was really good. And yeah, did you ever watch Eastbound and Down?
Yep.
Yeah, right. Even just TV shows were just better back then. It was just a whole different thing. But I mean, it's an interesting one, man. Like you've mentioned some good movies, and then obviously you'd sent me that band before, which I'd never heard of. So
so good,
dude. They're like epic. I've gone through like this kind of intense phase of like I don't know what's going on with me. I usually like a lot of heavy metal and I do like a little bit of hip hop and stuff like that, but I've kind of found myself reminiscing in like nostalgia vibes. So I'm finding all these songs from when I was younger and being like, oh wow. So I've created this playlist on Spotify and it's called an undeniably great music playlist created by a man who can't hear himself think, which I think is a hilarious name. Do you need to be hydrated? If so, you can do so with some Thirst Trap. This podcast is sponsored by Thirst Trap, and we are hydrating constantly on this podcast with Thirst Trap. You should have some Thirst Trap. And it's kind of philosophical. And it is just filled with all of these, man. And I feel like I'm going to listen to that band a bit more, and I feel like one's going to end up in here because literally, man, it's like, I just discovered the other day, you know the band Live?
Yep.
Their album, I can't remember, it's like their most popular album they ever did or whatever. I think it was the 1975 one or something. Incredible, man. Like I've just had this thing on repeat, and like I watch a lot of one of my favorite shows of all time, which is really, really dumb, and you might judge me for this. It's called is My Name Is Earl. Do you know this show?
Yeah.
Okay. It's very, very dumb show, but has an amazing soundtrack, right? A lot of really good like American classic old songs. So I think I struggle to find that now. Like talking to you is funny because it's not, I speak to so many people and some of them are still like 15 years older than me. And like they either don't watch movies or they don't really just listen to the radio. Like they don't have any, kind of like what you talked about before. It's like people don't have their own opinions, but a lot of what we see now is people don't actually spend enough time even constructing a personality. So when you talk to someone, they don't actually have anything to say about anything because they don't care. Like they're just kind of like, I'm happy to just have like Brooklyn Nine-Nine on while I like scroll on my phone, and I'm like, ugh, like yeah, right, you get it. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you some strong questions before we go because I like to put people through a speed round. If you're on death row, what would be your last meal?
16-ounce Wagyu ribeye with 3 cheese mac and cheese as a side.
Isn't that like exactly what he eats in Law Abiding Citizen before he fucking stabs the shit out of that guy? I'm pretty sure it is.
It's probably pretty close, but yeah, it's yeah, dude, 3 cheese mac and cheese is my thing. And then also ribeyes are my favorite steak. So
would you have a beverage?
Oh yeah, I'd have one of those Coca-Colas in the glass bottle.
Oh, dude, I just had one of them the other day. Amazing.
So much better.
Oh, here's an interesting one then. Do you like the Coke with no sugar or do you prefer full sugar?
I'd have diabetes if I had full sugar, and I also don't really I prefer not to have soda because then I end up having like another 300 milligrams of caffeine today because I'll drink 10. So I just drink soda water.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, there's a big debate here with a lot of people that say that the no sugar one's better. I think it is better personally, but it's just a preference.
It's a different mouthfeel. Like the sugar gives you a different mouthfeel than the aspartame.
I appreciate people that can appreciate mouthfeels because I feel like it's a really in-depth thing. I don't know if you ever watched, there was an episode of The Walking Dead, another brain dead TV show, but there was one where Daryl got locked in like a room and they played a song called Easy Street on repeat and tortured him with it. And I find that terrifying. If you had to be tortured with a song, like if you were locked in a room and let's put a time period on it, let's say 12 weeks, right? Really intense solitary confinement. What would you choose to be the song that you had to listen to?
Because I like it so much?
Well, I'm sure you might not like it after this period of time, but we'll find out.
Oh, Can You Feel My Heart by Bring Me the Horizon.
Oh, that would. Oh,
dude, at first it'd be so good, right? Like the first 2 hours, you just be vibing. You know, they give you some fucking MDMA or some meth, and you're just going. And then by hour, 26, by the time those party drugs have worn off, you're like, I want to kill myself. And if I hear this one more time, I want to kill myself.
Jesus, that's such a strong choice too. Like such a strong choice. That's like it. Oh my god! Like you can choose the most relaxed song ever, and you're like Darude Sandstorm. like oh my god. Oh, okay. So I feel like you've got a crazy answer to this, right? If you could spend 24 hours ish with anyone ever, who would it be? Now, I want to preface this, right? They don't have to be alive and they can actually be fictional.
Mm, probably Jesus.
Really?
100%. Because I think the thing too is like when you read, the parables that he spoke about in the Bible, and you read like how fundamentally he changed the lives of the 12 disciples, because the big thing about it too is like Jesus didn't pick like the successful good people, right? Like Saul of Tarsus, who became Peter, the rock on which he built his church, like actively hunted down and killed like Jews in early antiquity, right? So he was like a really bad person and probably one of the worst people. And then Jesus was able to use that person to then build his ministry. And so I think, for me, like there were so many parables in the Bible where I was like, oh my gosh, right? Like this is something. And I think being able to have that experience for 24 hours, and I'm also like really into near death experiences. And then I also read this book called Imagine Heaven, where this guy goes through like 1,500 near death experiences. And like a lot of these people have like very religious experiences when they have these near death experiences, and then like, they go to heaven and maybe they talk to Jesus and stuff. And I was like, that would be so sick.
Yeah. So, sorry, did you just say you're really into near death experiences?
Yeah, I've never had one, but I love reading about them.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I thought you were like almost like when you said you're like really into them, I'm like, you're like actively seeking them, or like it's yeah.
yeah, I overdose on heroin like once a week, and then I get Narcan.
I was like, dude, what? It reminded. What was the? Oh, there's like a movie that came out a couple of years ago that's ridiculous. I don't know if you ever saw it. The Lonely Island made it. It was called Pop Star, and it's a horrendous movie, right? But it's kind of dumb and funny. But there's a dude in it. It's played by Bill Hader, and he does a similar thing where he talks about how he's been really into flatlining, and he like took it from that movie Flatliners from the 80s or whatever, where like he literally because he's trying to have like a vision, right? So he's trying to like conk out and get brought back to life, and it immediately made me think of that, Stu. So I'm glad to hear that you're not doing it.
Yeah.
That was an intense answer. Jesus would be crazy. Also realizing the more that you talk about it, that you're probably not a huge Kanye West fan.
Dude, Kanye is based. Because the thing too is, um, whether or not I personally agree with them, like when people are like just unabashedly themselves, like I think there's like a huge, you're like, this is nuts. Like this is so sick. Because so many people, like we've talked about, they don't have opinions about anything. And so when you see someone who has like such strong opinions about everything, it's so far in the other direction that you have to appreciate it.
I can't disagree with you there. I do. I want to though, just for like the irony. But
Yeah.
that's I agree with you.
No, people shouldn't have opinions. I actually find that reprehensible.
Yeah, I know, right? Where would it would just be so good. I think this is hilarious then because I do ask this question, but I know it's going to piss you off, right? Because of the Marvel thing. So I have to ask if you could have an ability of some kind or a superpower, if you will, what would it be?
Probably to know what the stock market's going to do in the next 30 days. Like to know what individual stocks are going to like tank and moon. Because I
Just
think.
so
Stuart, go ahead.
just so we're clear, you could literally fucking cure world hunger, but you wanted the stock market thing. You want to go with that?
You can cure world hunger because you would have so much money. Because
Would you
that
though?
money is, yeah, that money is a vehicle with which, well, essentially, like if you can predict how the stock market's going to go, you essentially can print money. You could do whatever you wanted.
Would you do it? Would you use it to help world hunger? Do you think that'd be your first?
100%, dude. Like, there's
Yeah.
so many things that you could accomplish with that. Like, I think, what did they say? Right, we could completely eliminate homelessness in America with like, I don't know, $8 billion or $10 billion, and it's like, yeah, you could do that in 4 days if you knew and you had enough capital, right? And so it's like, yeah, do that because then that would allow you to like fundamentally change the landscape of everything that you care about and that you hold dear. Um, and you could do a bunch of really really cool stuff, and then you could also do like crazy stuff, like super wild stuff. Like I could just like run such a strong disinformation campaign in Canada that like I elect some kind of populist leader that I control. You know what I mean? Like I could be like the de facto George Soros in another country, right? And I'm like, dude, that, I don't know that I would necessarily want to do that, but I'm like, the thought of it when you have that much money, you're like, oh, well, you kind of do whatever you want, because there's people who have a ton of money and they can do whatever they want.
That's a really kind of like evil answer. I like it. I find that interesting. Okay. I knew they were going to be interesting, but it's very interesting because most people say fucking time travel or they want to fly, so that's very specific. Well, I think time travel would be pretty cool, right? Don't you think it'd be cool? Like, because then you could go
If
back
you
and
have
see
enough
Jesus.
money, you could make a time traveling machine, right? So the thing is like, if you have enough money, you can do all of these things, right? Like, you
Well,
could figure out how to fly, you could figure out how to time travel. If you pay smart people enough money, they'll figure it out.
so okay, that's an interesting. You think time travel's possible?
I don't know that time travel is possible without, if you interfere in any point without currently breaking the time limit exists. Um, and it's like, even the concept of like near light travel, or like traveling near the speed of light. Like, if we go to the next closest galaxy and then come back, it would be 4 million years later in the history of our planet. So like, we would go there and we would see all this crazy stuff, and then we would come back and it may not actually take us that long. The trip may take us a year, but because we were traveling near the speed of light, by the time we came back, every single person that sent us on that journey would be dead for 4 million years.
Yeah, it seems like it make it kind of not worth it then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like,
Yeah.
because of that, I'm sure that there's similar complicating factors with stuff like time travel. So I'm just like, oh, you know what I mean? Like, because it also, like, to what end, right? Because it's almost like a novelty. It's like, what are you going to go back and like talk to your grandfather and be like, tell me some lessons? Go.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to. I don't know. I'd like to experience different time periods. I think would be cool, just because like things were so different. Like I think the 1950s looked pretty cool, other than like all the bad stuff. But like the cool stuff about it seemed cool, right? Like, I just liked how people were. People dressed better, especially over there. You guys were like, yeah, see, like everyone talked like fucking weird, like radio hosts and stuff. I don't know. Maybe it's like a thing that's been marketed in my brain through movies again, but I feel like it seemed like pretty cool. And I like the whole. We recently watched Fallout, and that made me kind of go like, "Fuck, things looked cool back then." But
Did
maybe
you ever
they
play the
weren't.
games?
I played Fallout 3 and 4, I think. Yeah,
Dude,
yeah.
you gotta play New Vegas. Go back and play New Vegas.
By this point, you have probably seen one of these nasal strips. Now, if you have trouble breathing through your nose, then like me, you will probably feel immediate relief as soon as you try one of these on. I ran into these guys at an expo in Scarborough the other week, and I was amazed, to be honest, just how quickly I felt a difference once applying this nasal strip. And I think that I've been wearing them since while I've been sleeping, and I think that I'm going to start wearing them while I'm training. I have issues snoring. If you have issues snoring or possibly breathing through your nose, then they may be really helpful for you. If you want to find out where you can get some of these, you can go to thegoatco.au for their website, or at thegoatco_ on Instagram. Is when I played them, fuck, what would I have played it on? I think I played Fallout 3. I think that came out on like the original Xbox. The
Or
one before.
either Xbox or Xbox 360. Yeah.
Might have come out before the 360 or whatever. And that was like, fuck, dude, I feel like that game was like, you could just play that for forever, right? It was like, it's very solid. And when they made a show about it, I was like, yeah, you guys going to manage this? I think they did personally. I enjoyed it, but yeah, it's an interesting one. We could talk forever. So I'm going to ask one last question and then let you get on with your day. Now I've put a lot of pressure on myself. Let's do this. You've asked me what my strongest opinion is, and you are getting very popular on the internet for what I can only describe as being like a hilarious soundbite machine. Some of the videos you have put up, I have just laughed at like audibly. Like people near me have gone like, "Oh, what are you laughing at?" And I'm like, "This video," and then they're like, "Oh, that's actually really funny." So, what made you do that? Just quickly, and then what is your strongest opinion?
Okay, so a lot of it came down to, like, I did a lot of like freestyle skiing growing up, and that's a very weird segue into, there was like a
Super.
forum, very weird segue into,
I'd love to see where we're headed. Yeah, for sure.
there was a forum that I was part of, like way back when. It was called newschoolers.com. And it was just like people talking about skiing stuff. And then there was also this general forum. And people would just like troll each other and talk shit. And I was on that all day, every day, from the time that I got home to the time that I went to bed, for years and years and years and years. So I developed this like really good ability to, like, one, get a rise out of people, two, be able to form coherent thoughts relatively quickly, and three, to just be a complete fucking troll. And then I just kept refining that skill set, kept refining that skill set, kept refining that skill set. Now, 20 years later, I have this ability to just like fuck with people and troll them. And the thing too is, like, a lot of people, because they hold such strong opinions about things, like, they get super upset at a lot of the things that I say. I'm like, oh, none of this is serious. I don't take any of this seriously. You take yourself really seriously, which is why this is so confronting to you, but I don't take myself seriously at all. And that's why I'm having fun and you're miserable. So it's just, I started being a troll when I was very young, and I'm just really good at it now. And I think a lot of people take the things that I say at face value, and they're like, I'm like, oh, well, you have no sense of humor and you cannot sense sarcasm. So, strongest opinion.
Please, honestly, let it be about something like the moon landing or something.
No, because that's a very like NPC conspiracy theory opinion, right? Like, I don't have NPC conspiracy theory opinions. I have like very, you know what I mean?
It's funny because I don't actually have an opinion on it either, because I don't know. I've never even looked into it enough, because I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah, I don't either. And the only reason I believe in the moon landing is actually because I believe in American supremacy, and I want to believe that we beat the Soviet Union. I don't even care if it actually happened. I just want it to have happened because I'm so pro-America.
It's like patriotic ignorance. I love it.
Yeah. Okay, so this is my most controversial opinion, and people get really upset with it. I don't actually think that we have any sort of long-term evidence or long-term example that the governmental structures that we've had actually work for any of us. And I think we probably have like 6,000 to 10,000 years of evidence that it doesn't work. And I have, like, so I identify as like an anarchist. I don't think there should be any government. I think you should fucking leave me alone, right? Like, shut the fuck up. I'll have my land. You have your land. If you try to steal my stuff, I'll kill you. That's how this is going to work. And I think, in actuality, the more this is a very strong opinion, the more pro-government someone is, the more I start to realize, I'm like, oh, you're pro-government because you literally couldn't defend yourself if anything ever happened, and you need some kind of independent authority to enforce if something happens to you. Like, you obviously are super pro-government, because if you weren't pro-government, you would just be killed immediately and all of your things taken.
That's a really interesting perspective that I understand too. I agree with what you're saying. That makes a lot of sense. So for me, I think I never really consider it here because we have so many of our freedoms taken away. You guys can do way more shit. We're fucked here. We're like so controlled. But I also think at the same time, just personally on a level, I don't really need for a lot that I can't have. Like, you know what I mean? Like, maybe if I was brought up a little bit differently, where like I kind of get to do my own thing a lot. And for the most part, I feel like I operate outside of a lot of rules that we probably have. And I tend to like not do anything excessively, like when it comes to like taxes, or like I don't drive like an idiot on the road. So like I don't have a lot of issues that seem to come up for me in my life. Whereas like I have some relatives who are like fucking hate the police because they do a bunch of illegal shit and get caught for it all the time. And I'm like, well, look, I don't need to do the things that you need to do. I understand you like doing them, but you might want to take into account that, if you keep doing that, you're probably going to keep on getting the attention of the authorities. And then, for me, it's almost like ironic when people do dumb shit. Like I'll have like my brother or my cousin, they'll park somewhere they shouldn't park. Fuck them, right? Fuck them. And then I'm like, well, but now they now they're getting $120 of your money. So like, how do you feel better about that? Because like, I'm not saying that you shouldn't want to break a rule, but you're sort of getting fucked over in the situation. Like, you're acting like you're winning, but
you're losing.
You're losing, right? You're like, now you have to pay them fucking money. Like, why would you want to give them money? Like, people do it here with speed cameras all the time. Fuck them. And I'm like, dude, do you want to just give your money away? Like, it's not cheap. Like, we have a rule here. I don't know what it's like in America. If you get caught on your phone here, they brought in, like, our law is like $1,000, man. Like, literally like $1,000. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, it's $1,000. And I was sitting at a stoplight once, and there was a cop car, 2 cars in front of me. And they somehow saw me. Literally, I just swiped and changed the song on my phone, pulled me over, come up to the car and said, "Oh, what were you doing?" And I was like, "I just changed song." And he goes, "I'll be back in a second." And he came back and went, "Well, because you weren't texting, and the only way I know that is because I just asked you and you've told me that, so I'm basing this entire thing on that. It's $500 and 3 demerit points. We get 12 of them here. But if I had have been texting and for whatever reason then felt like I needed to confess that to him when he asked me and went, "Oh yeah, I was just texting," he would have charged me $1,000 and took 4 of my demerit points, which is like a third of what I need to actually keep my driver's license.
Here's the thing too, is like when it comes to police and interactions with police, because I love to speed.
Of course, in a Mustang while you're like shooting a shotgun, I'm assuming.
No, I like BMWs because they're much more comfortable at really high speeds. Like the first BMW I ever bought, I was like, "You're gonna see it. Like the speedometer goes to 330 kilometers an hour. I paid for the whole speedometer. I'm gonna use the whole speedometer."
Wow.
And so I remember I was driving home, and like the speed limit on the highway was 100 Ks. I was going, you get your license, they impound your car and take away your license at 50 kilometers an hour over the speed limit. So I set my cruise control to 49 kilometers an hour over the speed limit. And depending on the radar gun, it was probably 150, but I was like, whatever. And I'm in the left lane texting. I'm like, whatever, fuck these people. And I was coming home from a work event. One of the guys at the work event was like, "Yeah, like every time I get pulled over, I tell them I have diverticulitis and that I have an inflammatory bowel condition. And, I just say I shit myself and they let me go." And I was like, get pulled over? I'm going to try it. So I get pulled over, and this lady comes up to the window, and she's like, "Is there a reason why you were going that fast?" Or no, first thing she says is, "Do you know how fast you were going?" I was like, "Honestly, I have no idea." I was like, "You'd probably know better than me. You radared me and you pulled me over." And then she throws out a number. I think it was like 144 or something. And she's like, "Is there a reason why you were going that fast?" And I was like, "Actually, yes." And I was like, "I have diverticulitis, which is an inflammatory bowel condition. And I actually shit myself and had to clean myself up and throw my underwear away at the last en route, which is like a stop on the side of the highway." And she was so disgusted by my answer that she goes back to her car and like writes me a ticket for 15 over. And it was like $60.
Wow.
Just tell me shit yourself. Because like if any reasonable person tells you that and you're a reasonable person, you're like, "Yeah, that's really disgusting. I wouldn't want to sit in my own filth either."
Do you think if she'd threatened to take your license away, but then gave you the option to literally shit yourself to get out of the ticket, like to get out of losing your license, do you think you could have mustered up the shit? Like, and would you put yourself through that to keep your license?
You know what? I probably would have done it, and then I would have taken her to court because that's cruel and unusual punishment. She had a body cam.
I like your style, Stu. I understand now. I get it. Look, man, this has been a great conversation. It's awesome to talk to you. I think this is a really good example for people who probably could follow you on Instagram who would just listen to the conversation. And that's probably why I enjoy this the most, because it's always hilarious going from someone's like social media presence and then like just talking to someone, and they're always so different. Some of them aren't though. Some of them are just fuckheads as people, and that happens too. But yeah, man, look, I appreciate your strong opinions. I'm enjoying what you're doing on social media, and I thank you for your time. We barely talked about exercise, and I love that because we talked about so many things. So yeah, I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you for coming on.
100%.